In section 3, we're going to talk about parabolas. Now, we did talk about parabolas in module 4 when we were talking about quadratics, and that was a very, very special case of a parabola. And now we're going to talk about a general parabola because it is its own thing with its own equation. So a parabola is the set of points equidistant, which means the same distance, from a point that is called the focus and a line which is called the directrix. So in our picture here, you have a picture of a parabola. So the parabola is the curved part like it was in module 4. And then the directrix is depending on, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the direction the parabola opens. It's either a vertical or a horizontal line. And then the focus is always a point. And whatever the distance from the focus to the parabola is, the directrix will have that same distance. And that's how you get all of the points on your parabola. There's also something called the latus rectum. And when we talk about the latus rectum, it determines the width of the parabola from the focus. And the equation we use for that is the absolute value of 4a. And we're going to talk about where that 4a here when we talk about the equation of a parabola. But that will help you determine the width of your parabola at the focus specifically. So when we talk about the equation of a parabola, it can open one of two ways. It can open along the x-axis, which is what our picture above is. It opens left or right, and then it can open along the y-axis, which would be up or down. So the way that the equation for opening along the x-axis is 4ax equals y squared, where a is the distance from the vertex to your focus and your directrix. So again, this is a parabola that's going to open right or left. And then if it opens along the y-axis, it's 4ay equals x squared, where a is, again, the distance from your vertex to your focus and directrix. So this is something that opens up or down. In our first equation, we want to find the equation of a parabola with a vertex at the origin, so that means 0, 0, and a focus of 9, 0. So what I like to do is if I'm just given points, I use that to help me determine which direction my parabola is going to open, because the focus will always be inside the parabola. So it'll always be inside the parabola. So it will determine the opening direction. So I have my vertex here at 0, 0. And I have my focus, we'll say that's 9, 0. So the way my parabola opens is it has to open to contain the focus, which means it's going to open to the right, which means it opens along the x-axis. So I'm going to be using the equation 4ax equals y squared. And now all I have to do is plug in a. So the distance from my vertex to my focus, which in this case is 9, so we have 4 times 9x equals y squared. 4 times 9 is 36, so we get 36x equals y squared. And that's our equation. Our second example says find the equation of a parabola with a vertex at the origin and a focus of 0, -5. So again, if I were to use my little graph here, my vertex is at 0, 0. My focus is at 0, -5. So in order to contain my focus, it has to open down. So this means it opens along the y-axis. So we're going to be using the equation 4ay equals x squared. So when I talk about a here, because it's opening down, a is going to be negative. So the distance from my vertex to my focus is 5, but I do want to indicate that I am going down by a negative. So it becomes 4 times negative 5y equals x squared, which becomes negative 20y equals x squared. Now we're going to talk about how to graph a parabola from an equation. So we have the equation 16x equals y squared. So the first thing I want to do is figure out which direction this parabola opens. So because the y variable is squared, that tells me it opens to the left or the right. And because I have a positive 4a, it tells me it opens to the right. Then I want to identify my vertex, which is at 0, 0. Now I want to find my focus. So first I need to find a. So 4a has to equal 16. So you divide by 4, and that tells us a is 4. And because it opens to the right, my focus is on the x-axis. So my focus is at the point 4, 0. And then lastly, I'm going to use my latus rectum to figure out the width, which is the absolute value of 4a, which is going to be 16. So that tells me the width of my parabola at my focus. So now I'm going to start plotting my points. So my vertex is at 0, 0. My focus is at 4, 0. Also going to draw my directrix. So that has to be the same distance. So it's going to be at negative 4, and it's going to be a vertical line. Now I want to do my width. So I don't really have the space here. So for a latus rectum of 16, that means the entire distance from one side of the parabola to the other, which means my width is going to be 8 above and 8 below my focus. So that is going to help me with my width. So now I just connect those points and I have my parabola. Now, what happens if a parabola does not have a vertex at the origin? So it can still open along the x-axis, but now the vertex is the point HK instead of 0, 0. And A is still our distance from our vertex to the focus and directrix. And the way that we identify the vertex from this form is the exact same way we did it with the center of a circle. We do the opposite of what's with x and the opposite of what's with y. So 4a parentheses x minus h equals y minus k squared is still a parabola that opens left or right. And then 4a y minus k equals x minus h squared is still a parabola that opens up or down. And it does not matter which variable is squared when you're identifying your vertex. It's always x, the opposite of what's with x, and the opposite of what's with y, and you write it as a point x comma y. Let's go ahead and do some examples. So we're going to graph our parabolas, and for each one we want to state the coordinate of our vertex and our focus. And then we'll also do our latus rectum. So it's easiest to start with your vertex. So my vertex here, the opposite of what's with x, negative 2, and the opposite of what's with y, positive 2. Now I need to find my focus, which means I need to do 4a equals 4, divide by 4, and a equals 1. So I need to figure out, and am I adding this a to my x or my y value? Because it depends on what direction this parabola opens. And because my y variable is squared and 4a is positive, it opens to the right, which means I'm going to be adding it to the x value of my vertex. So I'm going to have negative 1, comma 2. So I graph my vertex, negative 2, 2. Then we have our focus at -1, 2. And then our directrix is 1 to the left, so that's at -3. And then for our latus rectum, the absolute value of 4 is still 4, so I have to go 2 up and 2 down for my focus, and that gives me my parabola. Our second example, -8 y plus 7 equals x plus 4 squared. So for our vertex, opposite of what's with x, so -4, opposite of what's with y, -7. And then for our focus, we have that 4a equals -8, divide by 4, and a equals -2. So now I need to figure out, am I subtracting that for x or y? So I need to know what direction my parabola opens. So because x is squared, it opens up or down, and 4a is negative, so it's going to tell me that it opens down, which means I'm going to subtract 2 from my y value, giving us a focus at -4, -9. So when I graph, my vertex is at -4, -7. My focus is at the -4, -9. And then my directrix, this time is going to be a horizontal line. And then for my latus rectum, the absolute value of 4a is going to be 8. So I'm going to go to the left 4 and the right 4 this time. And that gives me my parabola. For our last example, we want to find the equation of our parabola that has a vertex at 3, -4, a focus at 0, -4, and we're going to use our graph to help us visualize what that looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do is plot my vertex. So I'm going to go to 3, -4. And then my focus is at 0, -4. So that is going to help me tell what direction my parabola opens and then therefore what variable is squared. So the focus is always inside, which tells me that my parabola is going to open to the left, which means it opens along the x-axis. So we're going to use our equation 4a x minus h equals y minus k squared. So I plug in a, because it opens to the left, a is a negative value, so it's going to be 4 times -3, and then x, and then our x value from our vertex is 3, so the opposite of that would be -3 equals y, and then -4 is the y value for my vertex, which would be written as +4 squared. And then 4 times -3 is -12, so I have -12 x minus 3 equals y plus 4 squared. And that is the equation of our parabola with a vertex at 3, -4, and a focus at 0, -4. So please let me know if you have any questions about parabolas, whether or not that's identifying your focus or your vertex, or the opening direction or the width.